He had everything: money, power, respect. A perfect life in Lagos. A beautiful wife. 4 children. But Chris wanted one thing more: a son. When fate gave him another daughter, his pride became poison. He turned his back on the woman he loved, on the children he should have cherished. Years later, the children he rejected grew strong, fearless, unstoppable. The son he idolized became a storm of chaos. And then, the truth he ignored came crashing down, taking everything he thought he owned. Chris lived in Lagos, a city that never slept. Big cars filled the roads, tall buildings touched the sky, and money moved fast from hand to hand. In this busy city, Chris was a very important man. People knew his name. They respected him. Some even feared him. Chris was a highly successful businessman. He owned many companies across Nigeria. He had fleets of cars: black cars, white cars, long cars, short cars. His houses were big and beautiful. One was in Enkay, another in Lekki. His office was large, with shining floors and tall glass windows. When Chris walked into a room, people stood up to greet him. However, what people admired the most was his family. Chris had a beautiful wife named Annie. Annie was gentle, kind, and calm. She spoke softly and smiled easily. She took good care of her home and her children. People often said she was the kind of woman every man prayed for. Together, Chris and Annie had 3 daughters. Their first daughter, Ada, was smart and confident, even as a child. Their second daughter, Zora, was playful and enjoyed talking. Their third daughter, Nene, was quiet but very observant. The girls were beautiful, well-behaved, and full of life. Every morning, the house was filled with laughter. The girls ran around the house, their feet tapping the marble floor. Annie woke up early to prepare breakfast. The smell of tea, bread, and eggs filled the air. Chris would sit at the dining table, reading the newspaper while sipping his tea. "Daddy, look at me," one of the girls would shout. Chris would look up and smile. "You children will not finish me," he would say jokingly. On weekends, Chris took his family out. Sometimes they went to the beach. Other times, they went to fancy restaurants. People stared at them and whispered, "That is Chris and his family," they would say. "What a perfect life. God has really blessed that man." From the outside, everything looked perfect. But inside Chris's heart, there was a secret pain. Chris was never fully happy. No matter how much money he made, it was not enough. No matter how many houses he bought, he wanted more. Deep inside him was a strong desire that never left him. Chris wanted a son. In his culture, having a son was very important. A son carried the family name. A son became the heir. A son took over his father's empire. Whenever Chris went to village meetings, his kinsman would talk. "Chris, you are doing well," one would say. "But where is your son?" another would ask with a laugh. Chris would smile on the outside, but inside, the words hurt him like a knife. Sometimes, when he returned home late at night, he would sit alone in his study. He would look at his daughter's pictures on the wall. They were beautiful. They were healthy. They were intelligent. Yet, his heart still whispered, "I need a son." Annie noticed the change in him. She saw how quiet he became sometimes. She saw how he avoided village meetings. One night, she asked him gently, "My husband, is something worrying you?" Chris forced a smile. "Nothing, Annie. I am just tired from work." But it did not work. Then one day, Annie came to him with joyful news. "My love," she said, her eyes shining, "I am pregnant again." Chris froze for a moment. Then happiness rushed through him like fire. He stood up and hugged Annie tightly. "Thank you, God," he shouted. "This time, it must be a boy." Annie smiled, though she felt a small fear in her heart. She knew how badly Chris wanted a son. Still, she believed God knew best. From that day, Chris changed. He became the sweetest husband in the world. He bought Annie new clothes. He hired extra helpers. He followed her to hospital appointments. He stopped shouting. He smiled more. He even prayed every morning and night. This one will be a boy, he kept saying. I know it. Annie suggested one day, Chris, let us do an ultrasound to know the baby's gender. Chris shook his head quickly. No. I am a traditional man. I don't believe in all that. I have prayed. I have made sacrifices. God has heard me. Inside his heart, he was already celebrating. At least now, he thought, I will be free from the shame my kinsmen give me. I will finally have an heir. As Annie's pregnancy grew, so did Chris's hope. He told his friends, prepare yourself. This time, it is a boy. He even started planning names for the child. He imagined teaching the boy how to drive, how to run businesses, how to be strong. Annie watched him quietly. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes her heart felt heavy. 2 months later, the day came. Annie went into labor late at night. She was rushed to a private luxury hospital. Chris was still at work when he got the call. Sir, Madam is in labor. Chris dropped everything. He jumped into his car and drove fast, his heart beating with excitement. Today is the day, he said to himself. My son is coming. The hospital lights were bright and white. Nurses moved quickly from one room to another. The smell of medicine filled the air. Chris paced up and down the hallway, his phone in his hand, his heart beating fast. He was smiling. My son is coming today, he told himself again and again. I have prayed. I have given offerings. God cannot shame me. He remembered the faces of his kinsmen. He imagined going back to the village with pride. He imagined them calling him father of a son. The thought made his chest swell. After some time, a nurse came out of the delivery room. Sir, please wait. The doctor will see you soon, she said. Chris nodded and sat down, but he could not stay still. His leg shook as he waited. Minutes felt like hours. Then the doctor finally stepped out. Chris rushed to him with a wide smile. Doctor. Congratulations to me. My wife has delivered, right? Yes, sir, the doctor replied calmly. Chris clapped his hands together. It's a boy, right? The doctor paused. That pause was very small, but it felt very big. I'm sorry, sir, the doctor said gently. Your wife delivered a bouncing baby girl. The words hit Chris like thunder. A girl, he repeated slowly. Yes, sir. The baby is healthy. Mother and child are fine. Chris's smile disappeared. His face turned pale. His eyes lost their shine. He hissed loudly and stepped back. Another girl. Without saying thank you, he turned away from the doctor. The joy that filled his heart minutes ago dried up like water under the hot sun. So after all I did, he muttered angrily. He walked slowly to Annie's hospital room. Each step felt heavy. When he opened the door, Annie lay on the bed, weak but smiling. A small baby slept beside her. Chris, Annie whispered happily, God has blessed us again. Chris did not smile back. He looked at the baby and looked away. Disappointment was written clearly on his face. So after all I did for you to give me a son, he said coldly, you have decided to embarrass me. Annie's smile faded. Chris, she said softly, what are you saying? It is God who gives children. I do not choose. Chris laughed bitterly. God. You women always hide under God. Annie's eyes filled with tears. Please, this is not the time. I just gave birth. Chris said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Annie crying quietly on the bed. That night, Chris did not sleep at the hospital. He went home alone. For days, he avoided Annie and the baby. When Annie was discharged from the hospital, he sent a driver to bring her home. He did not go himself. At home, the house that once rang with laughter became quiet. Chris stayed out late. Sometimes he did not come home at all. When he did, he locked himself in his study. He barely spoke to Annie. Annie tried her best. She carried the baby on her back. She cooked his favorite meals. She spoke gently to him. "My husband, please eat," she would say. Chris would wave his hand. "I am not hungry." The children noticed the change. "Mommy, why is Daddy angry?" Ada asked one evening. Annie forced a smile. "Daddy is just tired." But Annie herself cried at night when everyone slept. Weeks passed. Months passed. Chris returned to work fully, but his heart was dark. One afternoon, he attended a family meeting in the village. He sat among his kinsmen, listening quietly. Then one of them laughed and said, "Chris, you are rich, but your house is full of girls." Others laughed too. Another man leaned closer and whispered, "Brother, your wife is the problem." Chris looked up. "What do you mean?" The man lowered his voice. "Some women are witches. They block the womb from giving sons. You should chase her away and marry another woman. You will see a boy." Those words sank deep into Chris's heart. He was educated. He had traveled the world. Yet, fear and pride mixed inside him. The thought refused to leave his mind. What if it is true? He returned home that day restless and angry. Annie greeted him with a smile. "Welcome, my husband." Chris looked at her differently now. Suspicion filled his eyes. 2 years passed after the birth of their fourth daughter. The baby grew into a cheerful little girl. Annie loved her children deeply. They were her strength. But Chris's heart grew harder. One evening, he stood in front of Annie, his face serious. "My uncle told me some time ago," he said. Annie looked confused. "What did he say?" Chris's voice was cold. "He said you are a witch. That you are the reason I have no son." Annie gasped. "Chris, how can you say such a thing? Confess." Chris shouted. "Tell me the truth." Tears rolled down Annie's face. "There is nothing to confess. I am innocent." Chris's anger exploded. "Get out of my house," he yelled. "Take your children and leave." Annie fell to her knees, begging. "Please, for the sake of the children." But Chris's heart was closed. That night, Annie left the house with her 4 daughters, her heart broken and her future uncertain. The night Annie left Chris's house was dark and quiet. The moon hid behind heavy clouds, as if it did not want to watch what was happening. Annie walked out of the big gate with 4 small bags and 4 little girls holding her wrapper tightly. Ada held her hand bravely, trying not to cry. Zora sobbed loudly, asking, "Mommy, where are we going?" Nene said nothing, her eyes full of fear. The youngest baby slept on Annie's back, unaware that her life had already changed forever. Annie did not answer them. Her throat was tight with pain. Her heart felt like it had been torn into pieces. Behind them stood the big house they once called home. The lights were on, but there was no warmth inside anymore. Chris did not come out to stop them. He did not call their names. The gate closed with a loud sound, and that sound echoed in Annie's heart. She had nowhere to go that night. A kind neighbor helped her call her elder brother. By morning, Annie and her daughters were on their way to her family's house. The journey felt long and painful. Annie stared out of the window, holding back tears. When she arrived, her family was shocked. "What happened?" her mother asked. Annie broke down and cried. She told them everything. How Chris accused her. How he called her a witch. How he chased her and her children away like strangers. Her mother cried with her. Her father shook his head sadly. "This world is not fair," he said. "But you and your children will survive." Life became very hard for Annie. She was no longer the rich man's wife. There were no drivers. No helpers. No big house. She had to wake up early, fetch water, cook, and still look for ways to feed her children. Some days, there was little food. Some nights, Annie cried quietly so her children would not hear. But Annie did not give up. She started a small business selling food. She washed clothes for people. She did everything honestly she could. Slowly, life began to change. Her daughters also grew. Ada helped her mother. Zora learned quickly. Nene was very sharp. Even the youngest girl smiled through the hardship. Annie told them every night, "You are special. You are not a mistake." Meanwhile, Chris's life took a different turn. Only a few weeks after chasing Annie away, he brought another woman into his house. Her name was Elizabeth. Elizabeth was beautiful and knew what Chris wanted. She had been in his life secretly, even when Annie was still his wife. People whispered, but Chris did not care. "Now I will have a son," he told himself. Elizabeth smiled and nodded. "You will, my love." Not long after, Elizabeth got pregnant. Chris was happy again. He forgot Annie and her children as if they never existed. He bought Elizabeth expensive gifts. He prayed again. He bragged again. When Elizabeth gave birth, the doctor smiled and said, "Congratulations, sir. It's a boy." Chris shouted with joy. He danced. He sprayed money. He named the child James. "My heir is here," he said proudly. He did not know the truth. Unknown to Chris, the child was not his. James belonged to another man. But Elizabeth kept the secret. She saw how Chris treated the boy. She saw how he poured all his love and wealth into him. Years passed. Annie's daughters were now grown. They were strong, educated, and fearless. One by one, they began to shine. Ada became a leader. Zora became a brilliant lawyer. Nene followed her own path with courage. The youngest girl, once chased out as a baby, grew into a graceful woman. Annie watched them with pride. She smiled through tears. God had not abandoned her. Chris, however, was blinded by pride. He did not see that everything he built was standing on a lie. He loved James more than anything in the world. From the day James could walk, Chris held his hand proudly. He bought him the best toys, the best clothes, and sent him to the best schools. He told everyone, "This is my son. My only son. My heir." James grew up knowing he was special. Whenever James did something wrong, Chris defended him. "He is a boy," Chris would say. "Boys are strong. Boys are stubborn." At school, teachers complained. "Sir, your son fights too much," one teacher said. Chris laughed. "That means he is strong." Another teacher warned, "He disrespects authority." Chris waved his hand. "He will learn later." But James did not learn. As he grew older, his anger grew with him. He fought classmates. He destroyed school property. He was suspended again and again. Each time, Chris paid his way out. At home, James talked back to Elizabeth and even to Chris. "I am your son," James would say boldly. "Everything here is mine." Chris smiled proudly. "Yes, my son. Everything here will be yours one day." Elizabeth watched quietly. Guilt sat heavy in her heart, but she said nothing. The secret stayed buried. When James became a teenager, the trouble became worse. He drank alcohol. He kept bad friends. He caused fights that reached the newspapers. People started whispering again. "Chris's son is dangerous. That boy would destroy him." Chris became angry when he heard such words. "They are jealous," he said. "My son is a king." James was brought into the company early. Chris wanted him to learn the business. But James did not listen. He misused money. He signed bad deals. He insulted workers. Slowly, Chris's businesses began to shake. Some companies collapsed. Some partners walked away. Money started disappearing. Chris shouted at the workers but never blamed James. "He is learning," Chris said again. Years passed quickly. James turned 20 years old. Chris called lawyers and family members. He sat proudly in his big office and made his will. All my properties, all my companies, everything I own, Chris said, will go to my son, James. James smiled like a king. A few weeks later, a strange man appeared at Chris's gate. The man was tall, calm, and confident. I am here for my son, the man said. The security men were confused. Which son? James, the man replied. Chris was called. Who are you? Chris asked angrily. The man looked him straight in the eyes. I am James's real father. The word stopped. Elizabeth collapsed on the floor, crying. The truth poured out like poison. James was not Chris's son. He never was. The boy looked at Chris coldly. You were never my father. The man took James away. They also took the documents Chris had signed. His properties. His empire. Elizabeth packed her bags and left. Chris was left alone. The son he lived for was gone. And everything he sacrificed for was taken with him. The house was silent. Chris sat alone in the big living room, staring at the empty walls. The chairs were still there, but the laughter was gone. The pictures of James had been removed. Elizabeth's clothes were gone. Even the sound of footsteps had disappeared. For the first time in his life, Chris felt truly poor. Not poor in money alone, but poor in spirit. The man he once called his son was gone. His companies were gone. His pride was gone. The world that once bowed to him had turned its back. Chris walked through the house slowly. Each room reminded him of something he had lost. He entered the children's old room. He remembered Ada's loud laughter. Zora's questions. Nene's quiet smiles. The youngest baby is sleeping peacefully on Annie's back. His heart broke. I chased them away, he whispered. I chased my own children away. Years passed. Chris grew older and weaker. His hair turned gray. His shoulders bent. The powerful businessman became a forgotten man. People no longer greeted him with respect. Some pretended not to see him. One day, Chris had news that shook him deeply. His first daughter, Ada, was now the managing director of one of the biggest companies in Lagos. Newspapers wrote about her intelligence and strength. His second and third daughters were famous lawyers, respected and feared in the courts. They fought for justice and won big cases. His last daughter, the baby he chased away at just 2 years old, was now married and living abroad. She had a beautiful family of her own. Chris smiled sadly. My daughters, he said softly. All of them are great. He tried to reach out. He sent messages. He made calls. He even visited Ada's office once. She refused to see him. The man who destroyed my mother's life is not my father, she said. The others agreed. They hated him, not because he was poor now, but because he broke their mother's heart. Annie, their mother, had also moved on. She remarried a kind man who respected her. She lived peacefully, surrounded by love. Chris never saw her again. One evening, Chris sat alone under a tree, watching children play. Boys and girls ran together, laughing freely. Tears rolled down his cheeks. All children are special, he whispered. I was blind. But it was too late. Regret became his only companion. And in that quiet pain, Chris finally understood the truth he had rejected all his life. A child's value is not in gender, but in love. Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe to Folktales for more interesting stories.